Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Saskia and Daniel. That was really fantastic. And I could just imagine sitting with you guys for hours and hours, enjoying the tales. So thank you very much. I'd like to introduce to you Ben Bowling and Nick Willing, who are going to talk about having artists for parents, and talk about the legacy and the challenges and the emotional elements and all the other factors that come into play as being children of artists. Ben himself is a professor of criminology and criminal justice at King's College London and co-director of the Frank Bowling Studio. And as co-director, along with his brother Sacha, Ben leads a 10-strong studio team and has overall responsibility for maintaining and building relationships with the artists' commercial galleries and the museums. He drives strategic planning and ensuring the studio's short, medium, and long-term goals are met, so that Sir Frank can continue doing what he loves, which is painting critically acclaimed works. Nick is a filmmaker who also runs Paula Rego's collection and archive. Nick's last two featured documentaries commissioned by the BBC have won numerous plaudits. Nick is also the director of Ostrich Arts Limited, the company which looks after Paula Rego's collection. He negotiated the contract with Cash Case Council in Portugal, which determines the day-to-day running of her museum, Casa das Histórias Paula Rego, and sets out her gifts and loans. He manages his mother's sales and valuations and other international museum shows, and I understand there's something like 22 planned for the next year. Pretty impressive. Additionally, he runs her archive and looks after her reproduction rights, authorizing or not the publication of her copyrighted images. I leave you two to entertain us. Thank you very much.
Entertain. There's a challenge. Thank you, Jasmin. So Nick and I met a few weeks ago to sort of plan what we might talk about. And we thought that it would be an idea to have some questions to kick off the conversation. And the theme of the conference is legacy. So our first question is, what does legacy mean? What does legacy mean to us as the children of artists and to the artists themselves? Second, what are the challenges facing an artist and their family in setting about trying to preserve, foster, be custodians for a legacy? And then thirdly, since this is the International Catalogue Raisonné Association's conference, perhaps start to think about what steps need to be taken to prepare for a catalogue raisonné. So those are our three questions, and we'll be relying on other people to keep time for us, to tell us to stop when the time comes. So Nick, what does legacy mean to you?
Well, it's one of those words that is used in films like Lord of the Rings, and nobody really knows what it means because it's what you make of it. I think for me, it means that the story that the artist told that was relevant and connected and engaged the world is continued after their death. Mm-hmm. And that story is a story told through their art, obviously. And that is, I'm going to tell you one very quick story.
I knew you would.
Because I come from a family of storytellers from Portugal. My mother is Portuguese. So I was brought up in Portugal. And my parents, because I also look after my dad's estate, Victor Willing, by the way, we mustn't forget him. They came to London to be artists because in those days, in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, you couldn't be an artist develop your career in Portugal. But they left the children, quite rightly, with the grandparents. Because you can't have children when you're trying to develop a career as an artist. I don't know if any of you have children, but get rid of them. I think well, I'll leave you to explain your particular experience of that. But and I was about 6, because they'd come for the holidays, quite right, at Christmas and a few weeks in the summer. And I got pissed off, and I said to my parents, particularly my dad, I said, well, Dad, I went to school. I go to school here, and a lot of the kids have parents who are architects and doctors and lawyers, and I understand what those people do, but what the hell is the point of an artist? And my dad said to me, as if he was reading from the definition of a dictionary, straight off the bat, without even thinking about it, he said, Nicholas, an artist is like an explorer that goes to worlds nobody's ever been to before and brings back a picture that nobody's ever seen, but we all instantly recognize. And that helps us understand who we are. I thought, fuck me. That's amazing. And from that moment on, the age of 6, I became very interested in the worlds that they brought back. And that's why I'm here. It's not a job that I want to do, but it's a job that, in fact, I don't call it a job. I call it a duty or a burden or a pain in the ass sometimes. But I did become incredibly interested in their work, and particularly my mother's work, because I spent all my childhood when we were together drawing with her. That's what we did every day. Come on, Nikki, let's draw some horrible pictures of those bullies, or, you know. And so I understood her work through doing it. As my dad used to say to me, the thought is made in the mouth. You think it as you say it, and painting is a bit like that. You by doing it, you find out what it is. So that and that then, you know, jump forward to now, or maybe 10 years before my mother dies, and I think, okay, and when I'm asked to get involved, it's very difficult to say no.
Yeah.
Because
yeah. Well, I can totally empathize with the sense of the duty, the burden. I mean, in some ways, I think it is a job. I mean, we both have other jobs, but it is a job of work. You manage the archive, and you work for the museum, and so on. So there are quite a lot of kind of technical job-like things. You know, there's the studio, you go to work, you spend a lot of time doing emailing and visiting people and so on. So it feels to me like that, you know, it is a job of work. I've just turned 60. I can certainly see the next decade as being a decade, well, you know, that I'll be in this job. I like you didn't look for it. I think in about 1999, I just started at King's, and a colleague, I went for lunch with a tax lawyer, and he said to me, artists can be very cruel. You know, they spend their entire life painting and ignoring their children, and then they die and leave a terrible mess that somebody has to clear up. So you might want to avoid that.
yes,
By having a conversation with your dad and begin the process of conversing with him about, you know, what his thoughts and his plans are. So I did have those conversations. They were very, very sketchy at the time. And gradually, so it's something that I could sort of see in the distant horizon, you know, a little bit like across the kind of plain somewhere, you see some dust rising in the distance. And you think, that could be a herd of elephants. And then suddenly in 2018, there you are in the thick of them with these great trampling hooves and the dust, and risking avoiding being crushed to death by the weight of what it means to...
I'm there now because my mum just died in June.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that we've been preparing for, the herd of elephants, has arrived.
Yeah.
And they're not, I see them like HMRC is more like a hungry gargoyle than a herd of elephants in my world. But the hungry gargoyle is there poised.
Yeah.
And the hungry gargoyle, by the way, guys, as you're preparing, changes its mind, and it's up to the hungry gargoyle to decide whether you can plan for something, but then it's up to them to decide whether what you've planned for is actually what the HMRC are going to interpret it as what you've, do you see what I mean? There's no rule.
Yeah.
They change their mind on a, you know, because they need the money.
So in this respect, it seems to me that managing an artist's legacy, in our case, you know, Dad's 88, he's still in the studios. We were in the studio yesterday, he's still making work. But nonetheless, it is a bit like managing a family business.
Yes.
In the sense that you have like a founder and the producer of these incredible works, but there's also these incredibly mundane things that you've got to deal with, like HMRC. I mean, mundane, you know,
Yeah.
and gargle, horrific, of course. Yeah. You have to deal with, you know, tax. You know, now our studio team is large. We have to, you know, considerations about managing human resources and, you know, the physical, you know, the actual physical studio and so on. So you've got the sort of very practical kind of work-a-day aspects of running a business. And also you've got the questions, the kind of answers that you came up with at the beginning of the question of legacy, which is, what's the story? What is the job of preserving the material? Obviously, preserving the physical objects is absolutely crucial. That, in a way, is the legacy. In some ways, the tangible physical objects, the paintings and the drawings and the sculptures and so on. There's the archive in our case. In my dad's case, he didn't throw anything away ever. So we have vast volumes of material, which looks a bit like rubbish when you first look at it, like old matchbooks with little notes in them, or paint receipts from 1970, all of which are wonderful, the grist for the mill of the conservator and the art historian and the researcher and the catalogue raisonné and so on. But then there's a sort of finding the story. How is the work to be interpreted? And as has been said in the previous panel, that can be interpretations by all kinds of people about what this artist was like, what their story was, what the art means. And I think, even though I come to this task, this role, this burden, this obligation from a criminologist's perspective rather than an art historical perspective, nonetheless, I do find myself constantly looking at the work and thinking about, how do you make sense out of it? I don't curate because I'm not a curator, and yet I am called upon, I'm sure you are too, to talk about the work, to explain it to people, to explain the artist. You know, what were they trying to do? What's their motivation? So legacy, it seems to me, is partly about kind of running the shop, almost, or running the physical studio, and running a small family business. And it's partly sort of developing a sort of an idea about the artist, thinking about what is my dad going to bequeath, what does he bequeath to us, his family, and what does he bequeath to the wider world, and how do you make sense out of that? What story do you tell? So I think that seems to be...
I'm interested also to hear how, when you said to Frank, oh, let's prepare.
Yeah.
Whenever I asked my mum or brought up the subject, she said, darling, don't worry, I'm not going to die. And it wasn't a joke. She was completely and utterly convinced that that was not an option, so you won't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And but
well, in a way, sorry to butt in, but I think in a way it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
well, but she meant physically.
Yeah, but this idea that we tell ourselves, I mean, none of us are going to die. We're all going to be immortal. But it's very tough, because I think that the whole idea of legacy, the sort of starting and end point, is death. It is, you know, there is, without, you know, okay, maybe retirement. If you're talking about the legacy of a senior diplomat or whatever, an academic, it's, you know, your legacy once you retire. But in this context, it's the defining moment is the passing away of the artist and their afterlife. And actually, artists do have an afterlife. So Paula Rego's immortality, Victor Willing's immortality, is in the paintings. it's
But then again, you see, there's another thing, which I don't know, I'm sure Frank may have this thing as well, which is that my experience of both my dad and my mum is that the future is something you have to put out of your head. I mean, if you're painting, what I mean is if you're painting, the whole idea for them was the immediacy and the vitality of the moment of expression. And that has to come with, it can come with baggage from the past, but you have to, in their case, put it through a meat grinder of disassociation. In other words, they have to remove themselves from this so that the painting happens without them getting in the way. I mean, that sounds like a weird thing to say.
No, I think
it's definitely a Paula Rego or a Victor Willing or Frank, but I mean, I don't know, I'm not speaking for Frank, but then you see it's existential, because if you then start thinking about, oh, well, of course, this painting will be very good in the Royal Academy in 20 years' time. That completely goes against what they're doing. Yeah. And then becomes self-conscious. And once it's self-conscious, it's shit.
I get that. I mean, there certainly are artists that as a non-artist or a really non-artist that you look at and you can see the repetition, and that somehow they've got maybe early career success. I don't know, that gets people a bit trapped.
Yes.
In the case of Frank's work, every few years everything radically changed. I mean, he was, take the Cord paintings for example, probably the most marketable, after the maps. And then, after doing those for 2 or 3 years, that's it. And that's it, done, doing something completely different. Mm. So I agree with you that putting aside the idea that there is an end and that the work might find its way somewhere. I mean, not to say that he and his wife, Rachel, and the family have not worked at finding places for the work to go. He and Rachel traveled Europe, they traveled America, often with paintings in the boot of the car, taking, kind of doorstepping museum directors and curators and saying, come to the boot of the car and have a look at these. But wow. I certainly agree with you that pushing the idea of an ending out of the way, so that sense of transcendence, of immediacy is there. But a couple of things have shifted that. So in 2018, my brother Sacha and I went to a workshop with the Institute for Artist Estates in Berlin, and they were incredibly helpful in helping us to understand. It was like a week's training, let's say, and then some consultancy. That was really helpful. In 2020, just on the eve of lockdown, my dad was very, very ill. He was in hospital for nearly 3 months or 2.5 months, and nearly died. And in that moment, it kind of brings forward all of the, the questions about what happens next.
Yeah.
Even though we've been thinking about them in a very sort of passive way, this was like, okay, you really now need to focus on some practical things. And when he recovered, I think he was much more willing to engage with the question of what happens next, because we were all painfully aware of.
And what did that mean? I mean, what did you do? Did you do a will? Or?
Well, there was all of that. A lot of it was in place. We did certainly engaged more extensively with the solicitor to try and put some structure on things. But I think probably the most important thing that happened was that Sacha and I spent much more structured time with my dad and with Rachel, with Frank and Rachel. So since the autumn of 2019, we have met every Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, Sacha, Rachel, Frank and I, to talk about the things that have happened in the previous week, what's coming at, over the horizon, what's happening with the staff, what's happening with exhibitions that are coming up. And essentially, Frank has delegated. I think etymologically, there's a relationship between legacy and delegation. It's about kind of passing on a mission to some people, and there's a sort of ambassadorial role. So I think the big shift was Frank entrusting Sacha and I to run the studio and to begin to do the preparations. So both Sacha and I are now 4 days a week working for Dad. And it's, well, I still have 1 day a week at King's. I joke, I'm 1 day a week at King's and 6 days a week working for my dad. And of course, you know, he's 88 years old. He needs care in various different ways. So I would say the big shift was establishing the kind of trust that allowed him to say, okay, you know, the trust that might be placed in the gallery.
Yeah.
I'll let that just sit there for a moment. The kind of trust that
By the way, galleries. Oh, never mind.
No, okay, let's moving on quickly. Ultimately, I feel that the trust has to be passed to family members who have a sense of kinship, and I think, I mean, we've been lucky. We've been given the gift of time. So 2019 to now, that's over 3 years, where we have got to understand the work. We've begun to understand the museum world, the gallery world. That kind of passing the baton on,
Yeah,
and saying to us, okay, you know, you deal with the gallery. You have conversations. You know, at one point, you know, Frank decided to move on from his previous gallery, and that's you know, shortened my life. And his probably, but it's something that it's part of the duty, it's part of the obligation, it's part of the work to take that stuff up, and that I think helps to anticipate what things are going to be like going forward when he's no longer here.
one of the things that happens when the artist dies. Oh, I can't say that really. One of the things that happened when my mother died, and also my dad died. My dad died in 1988. So, and he was quite well known in the 80s, but then he sort of, because he died, you know, the interest waned somewhat. And I was aware of that in preparing in the last sort of 10, 15 years. One of the things in my case, what happened is I was living in LA in Hollywood, making movies there. And I got a call from my mum in 2011, that said, Nikki, you've got to come back and help me with Portugal, because Portugal had gone bankrupt. The whole country had gone bankrupt. And therefore, they wanted to abolish her foundation. And she had her entire collection of work in the museum that I had opened just in 2009. So what was that, 2 years earlier? And the whole thing had gone pear-shaped. And I thought I was making a movie, you know, it was a bit inconvenient, but I did come back. I bought a suit, hired a lawyer, and I went to negotiate with the Portuguese government. I mean, can you imagine, in Portuguese? Just as well I spoke Portuguese, but my lawyer was out of his depth. He clammed up because he was in front of the Minister of Culture and the blah, 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 the president. But what we did is I managed to get out of there after 6 weeks with a deal that meant that we could get our pictures out after 10 years. This is her entire collection. We're talking 250 paintings, 2,000 drawings, 7,000 prints. I mean, it's a massive, it would have been a massive land grab if that had gone wrong. And we were also aware, we were told by lawyers, that if we hadn't done that, that work, if we weren't careful, would have been considered liable for British inheritance tax. So there we are, it's stuck in a museum, we can't sell it. It's worth God knows how many millions, and we would have to find that money from somewhere. So that really woke me up. I thought, okay, this isn't just mum's pictures. This is going to screw us royally if I don't pay attention. I mean, on a legal level.
And financially.
And on a financial level. So then I had to become very much more involved. I sort of took over the stewardship of my mother's, of the museum, and helped her. And mum, of course, didn't say, oh, darling, it doesn't matter. but she didn't really understand it because, again, she was in the moment in her studio. She was trying, her whole mind was focused on an entirely different pursuit, which is trying to figure out if Jane Eyre's having an affair with this person, what would the picture look like if I put this person in a dress and that person holding a cabbage? You know, that's her. And does that work? And is that
much more interesting and much more engaging, much more creative than running a business, which is
well, business is numbers. She had a thing about numbers. I don't. Does Frank is he good with numbers?
Not especially, no.
No,
Not really, no. No, paint, but numbers not so much.
It's like one goes without the
Yeah,
you can't have both.
Not really. Painting by numbers, I suppose, but no. Yeah, I think that it comes back to what you're saying about denying the possibility of death. Not wanting to be concerned with the details of the everyday, and particularly combine those two. The technical details of what happens when you die is something that Frank does absolutely not want to have anything to do with.
And perhaps we should say that the reason we're doing this, Ben, me, and you guys, Saskia, I would imagine, and Daniel, is because eventually we inherit this thing. It's not, unless the artist has been good with numbers and legal stuff as well as paint, which I've never heard that happen. I mean, I've met many, many artists, hundreds of them, and then none of them really, I can't imagine who would be good at that, and planning. Maybe Michael Craig Martin later would, you know, but I don't know. And so that means that they leave their offspring with this conundrum, this problem.
Yeah.
And if their offspring don't wake up to the fact that that's a conundrum and a problem for them, they're in trouble. And part of my duty now, by the way, is to get this off the back of my children. If I get run over by a bus tomorrow, they're in trouble, or other. They will take on that burden, or have to take on that burden regardless, because they inherit everything I've got, you know, more or less. So, so I'm going to try and lift that off them and put it in the form either of some sort of, well, we'll see, a foundation perhaps, or a, I mean, these are then the conversations that you have to have. It's the, what do you do before? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that what happens with the next generation is a massive issue and a concern. I mean, in a way, you've got there are kind of competing imperatives in a way. There's the familial and the kinship, and this idea of a family legacy, you know, the Bowling name or whatever. And I have a grandson, so Frank has a great grandson, and so we have, you know, we're engaging more about what the future looks like. You know, that, you know, here's a person who might well, you know, if he lives to the age of that Frank is, he will experience the 22nd century. And after all, legacy is about thinking about, you know, identifying something in the present that will resonate into the future, something from the past that continues to resonate and to have relevance to you know, younger generations, to future generations. So there's the sort of, there's the familial sphere, which often tends to be a sort of non-specialist. You've got a sense of knowledge about the work because it's part of the family legend, the visits to museums and all of that stuff. And then there's the professional sphere. You know, in a studio team, you have a sort of, you know, have an archivist, researchers, a registrar, you know, people to manage all of the sort of the technical side of things at the way. And I suppose then that leads into questions about what a foundation looks like that perhaps takes it out of the family.
And a catalogue raisonné.
And a catalogue raisonné,
we'll come to.
Places it, takes it out of the family into the realm of the specialist, because the legacy is, in a way, like a public legacy. There's a story about Kafka. Kafka, you know, this might be apocryphal, said that he only ever had written 3 novels that he was proud of and wanted the rest to be destroyed. And the literary executor didn't act on that to the benefit of the world because the other novels survive.
Well, he was wrong.
So, so who is the decider? Who holds?
You know, I've just put on an exhibition in Casa das Histórias Paula Rego Victor Willing. You should all go. It's just outside Lisbon. Lovely train ride along the coast. We opened it 3 weeks ago, and it is of 1970 work by Paula Rego from the 1970s. Work she wanted to all destroyed. Mm-hmm. She hated it. She wouldn't show it. In fact, in every retrospective she's ever had, the 70s occupy almost, you know, there's 2 gouaches or a sketch or something, but she did hundreds of paintings, and she would have wanted them all destroyed. And only now, after her death, was I able to put on this show, which is fantastic work. So she was wrong about that. She was right about some of the pictures; they are pretty ghastly, but on the whole, they give you a great insight into this powerful driving. And we should say another thing, I should say, that I've become aware of since June when she died. And that is that after somebody's died, there is no libel or slander law. So anybody can say whatever they like about you. There is a privacy law where the family can say, oh, but that was supposed to be private. You can't say that. And then you go to court and then it's obviously not going to be private anymore. But you can sue for that. But that's a very difficult thing to sue on. So here we are. We have an artist, Paula Rego, whose story and whose pictures are storytelling pictures. There is a powerful narrative behind each work that is reflecting her life as well as the story she is trying to tell in the painting. The 2 are mingled, you know. It's a personal and a literary thing. It's a combination of lots of, but they are always basically personal pictures. And therefore, the story of the artist, her personal story, there's a very good film about this called Paula Rego Secrets and Stories, made by her son. You must all go out and look. It's brilliant because it tells this side of things very, very well.
It's very good.
It's very, 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 very good. It's very good because of her, actually. She is so brilliant at talking about her story. But she's also extremely cryptic. And whenever she spoke to art reviewers, she'd always lie, mostly, particularly if there were men. And women she knew she couldn't lie to because they would get it. They would understand. And Portuguese men in particular, I should say, reviewers, you know, they would come and their pomposity. And so that is then becomes, oh my God, now we can't stop this tirade that is potentially, we have had a few things written about her which I've gone, oh my God. But that's what also happens. So we have to continue telling the truthful story, if you will, her story, what actually happened, or...
Yeah, that's...
And with abstract painting, it must be similarly tricky.
It is. And of course, there are also, so in Dad's work, there's the period from the art school days, 56, 58, to 1966, which are figurative, particularly the works made in the early 60s, so 61, 62. So dealing with what I think are today even, but certainly would have been even more so in the early 60s, themes of childbirth, abortion, mixed race relationships, you know, and they're pretty racy, and they're obviously drawn from life experiences, and also from the life room, let's say, or at least drawn, you know, the drawings for these paintings are drawn from life. Now, it's no secret that Frank fathered 3 children from 3 different mums in between 1962 and 1964. So, you know, some
total period.
a fertile period. It was absolutely everybody concerned. And I think that, you know, one of the tasks on our to-do list is to commission a biography. And this is not for years ahead, Nastasia, don't worry, our archivist is here. You see, who, you know, obviously the archive is you know, the kind of stock of a lot of knowledge about the artist. And so, you know, it certainly is in my mind, in our minds as a family, what does a biographer make of that period? You know, because obviously the paintings are the stuff, but everybody wants to know about, you know, about the artist. I mean, so my mother's also a painter, and my stepfather, now long gone, so she used to do exhibitions at home. And my stepdad noticed that a lot of people always want to go and use the toilet. They come and say, "Oh, can I use the loo quick?" And he said, people coming to look at the art, but they're not. They're actually coming to look at your toilet. They actually want to look behind the scenes. There's a kind of prurience, a kind of an interest in, well, you know, what does the artist sort of smell like?
Where did they poo?
Where did they
That's
poo?
I never knew that. But my mum's toilet was absolutely filthy in her studio. It was from the original 1920s. She never changed it. Maybe that's got something.
It's something about, okay, it's partly what's, you know, what makes a good biography. You know, what's going to get your biography, you know, reviewed.
And after they've died, you have no control.
Right.
Think about
That's
that.
a good point. Yeah.
Once they're dead, anyone can write an order. I mean, the only thing that you have to your advantage is that every book will want to include the pictures, and you retain the reproduction rights of those pictures. So that's what gives you the right to, because they'll want to, you know, it's like, how can you write a book about Disney without Disney's, you know, without Mickey Mouse in it?
I mean, it's something we're speaking now towards, you know, questions about the challenges that we face. And I do, you know, I do lose sleep about a number of different things.
Oh, yeah.
You know, crucial thing is family harmony. Was everybody going to get along? Make sure that, and then what's, you know, our generation, I think we're pretty sorted, but what, you know, the next generation, how do the cousins get on? How might they, you know,
that's a very
in their late 20s and early 30s now, you know, how are they going to manage that? You know, will art historians be kind to the work and to the artist? And there was conversation earlier about the role of them in the market. The markets go up and down, you know, obviously, you know, at the moment, you know, bowling seems to be hot, which is great. And it's, you know, a lot of shows, not 22, mind you. I could see the studio team wincing at the thought of it.
That's a lot.
We did 5 solos shows this year, and it was.
We just have one opening in the Pelham Museum in Istanbul on the 20th of December. You must all come along. We just opened one 2 weeks ago at the Kessner Gesellschaft in Hanover.
I mean, it's a huge amount of work, but there's also just a huge amount of emotion that's attached to it, because we're talking about the relationship with the parent, in our case, the future death of the artist, in your case, the aftermath. All of those things. It's this idea of a kind of a duty and a responsibility, a mission. All of those things. It's deeply personal, even though it's not about us, because we have our own lives and jobs and so on, but it's about mum and dad.
Oh, I hear her voice all the time. It's really annoying. I hear her saying, you know, telling me stuff, and when they die, they, you know, it's like Star Wars. The Force gets stronger. You know? Suddenly, I hear her younger voice, and sometimes the younger voice disagrees with the older voice, and that gets very confusing. Because the older voice is one thing, a younger voice says completely the opposite, and that's happened all the time. And so it is a. I have to say, I'm very blessed because I have 2 sisters who are involved also in different levels of interest, but they are hugely supportive and helpful. And so we do have, and your thing about family harmony is absolutely essential, because they both have superpowers. One knows where all the bodies are buried. The other one knows all the dates of all the bodies buried. One's got a numbers thing and the other one's got, you know, and that's, but we should talk about catalogue raisonné, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Q&A. We want to do a Q&A now.
Yes. Why don't we, and since the experts on catalogue raisonné in the room.
I don't want to be too Sigmund Freud, but I have a question for you both as individuals. So you come here, you're totally cogent as adults. I would like to know how you were vis-a-vis your parents as adolescents when you, or any other moment of dissent. You know, I have an adolescent child who's not, he was a challenge. So as the children of great parents, you know, very cumbersome, present, big parents, especially unique, you know, I'm referring as a woman. Have you ever dissented? Were you ever against?
Say that again, the last bit.
Against?
Against.
Well, who against?
Against them, against your parents.
Was I ever against my parents?
Yes. Were you ever dissenting with them? Were you ever, you know, not in this kind of like mood of accepting that you clearly are?
Oh, all the time. Of course. I mean, Jesus Christ, they're our parents. I mean, how often do you rebel against your parents or get pissed off with your parents? I mean, they were also my parents, apart from being, I actually, in the 70s, probably around 74, 75, when I was a very young teenager, 12, 13 years old, I suddenly thought, oh, maybe she's a genius. I did think that, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do the 70s work, because that's when I started to really engage in the work. I was young enough. And I knew she was pretty much a rubbish mum, but sometimes she was a fantastic mum. She was incredibly funny. She was incredibly charming. She could wrap you around her finger. She was the most beguiling and hypnotic person. And also she involved me so intimately in everything, but I realized that she did that with everybody, you know, but yeah, I mean,
yes, I mean, you know, adolescence surely a time to kick against the parents. So I had two brothers. My older brother died young, and he was a musician and a writer and rebellious. My younger brother's a filmmaker and also rebellious in his own way. I was the kind of middle child, the sort of sensible one. So I probably kicked against Dad and this particular role less than the other two. Dan sort of checked out early. Sacha is, you know, very, very involved, but nonetheless, I carry certainly a lot of the emotional stuff. But yes, I think definitely there is definitely a kind of, in a way, a creative tension, perhaps in both in parenting and in managing a legacy. But yes, there is, you know, there are certain times when both Sacha and I will say, no, please, you know, no, don't do that. And now, you know, we can actually say, no, not doing that. So that's that. The adolescence is still ongoing.
Yeah, I do get. Yeah, should we wrap up? Okay, we have to wrap up. Should we say just do something about catalogue raisonné or not? 2 minutes. We got 2 minutes.
I think that I would like to say something a little bit different, which is just a bit less than a year ago, we got a letter from a primary school in South London who said that they'd named their classrooms various artists, and one of them was the bowling class, and if they would like to go and visit. So I went last week to speak to 96-year-olds, and who all knew about Frank Bowling. The first child who spoke to me said, if you're Frank Bowling's son, why are you so old? But apart from that, it was absolutely joyous, because there they were thinking about the work, looking at the work, finding things in it, and then making.
And I'll just very quickly add to that when the Tate show opened, whenever it was 2 years ago, I had to, you know, go and help with that. And I walked into the room of 60s of 9 when I was a child. I was born 61, so, and I saw all my brothers and sisters on the walls, you know, because these pictures when I was growing up were so powerful, and then I didn't see them again until that moment, because they all went off to collectors, museums, and And that is one of the things you do have to share your parent with the work. And it's just as well, it's good. Because there's a lot of artists who aren't good. And they still do this to their kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you.